Welcome to Leadership and Culture in Healthcare. We're into series 3 and we're concentrating on leaders in the independent healthcare sector. We've looked at NHS leaders in provider trust, we've looked at national leaders, and now we're into the independent sector. And I'm delighted that Andrew has joined me, Andrew Walton. Andrew from Connect. Andrew, say hello to people, explain what you do, who you work for, and then maybe how did you get to that position, leading a fabulous independent healthcare organisation?
Well, thank you for calling it fabulous. So much appreciated. Who am I then? My current job title is Group Executive Director at Connect Health Group. I'll explain a little bit about what they do in a second. But first of all, what about me? So the reason that I don't have a portfolio in my title, such as operations or finances, I'm not very good at very much. And I had the fortune to found Connect Health when I was 26. Now there's no visuals here, but that was 35 years ago. So that's been my life's work, as they say. So as you probably tell from my voice, I'm a Geordie by background. I've got various chips on my shoulder. I was brought up in the West End of Newcastle, which is not paved with gold. I was from a loving family. Didn't have much money. I went off to uni, did physio, and set off for a lifetime in the NHS. I worked at 3 different organisations in the first 6 or 7 years of my career, and I just found it really difficult to get stuff done. Perhaps I was a bit naive. Perhaps I was a bit too. Principle is not the right word, but I had a very simple view of the world, and I still do, to be honest. And I thought things ought to be done in a particular way. So didn't get traction for that. Found it really difficult. I got married. We were thinking about having kids. It wasn't a good time to start thinking about changing career. So my only option was to get out of the NHS and do something in the private world. I didn't set off with a vision to deliver services back into the NHS. It was just an escape route, really. I set the business up with a podiatrist and a GP. My interest and their interest was musculoskeletal. And we just opened a little private practice in a place called Hebburn, not Heaven, on the banks, definitely not Heaven, on the banks of the River Tyne. I won't give you every year of the following 35, but the key milestones were GP fund holding came along in 92, 93. Local GP said, why don't you give us deliver a service into our practice? We can't get the local hospital service to deliver on site. They seem expensive. We've got no data as to visibility of outcomes and performance. So I said, yeah, I'm right up for that. Getting back into the NHS I saw as a good thing. We'll skip the next 20 years, basically. Where we were still very typically a small business, so that we had about 60 staff over that 15 years, doing a bit of work in Fundle, a bit of work in private practice, and I was joint managing director with another physiotherapist. The head of HR was another physiotherapist, so we were riddled with physiotherapists and not much else. Sort of mid-noughties, a service was advertised in the back of the HS chair when there used to be a hard copy of it, and it was a service in Camden. I remember going down, getting the train down with my best bib and tucker on, getting off the train, going to a bidders event, and walking in the door and thinking, Andrew, you've made a terrible mistake. What the hell do you know about? Because there was all the great and the good from physio and orthopedics across London were at this service, telling the commissioner what on earth were they putting it out to tender for. It was a fantastic service that was delivered by Royal Free and UCLH. Anyway, we decided to bid, give it a go, and guess what? We were successful in that. So that's another milestone where we're delivering out away from Tyneside in London, delivering basically a physio musculoskeletal service, and that was about 2010. That didn't go too well. I learned lots of lessons. It didn't go well for all sorts of different reasons, not least because actually we weren't really set up for doing what we were trying to do. So I spent the next couple of years scratching my head thinking, well, we don't want to do that again. We do think we've got something to offer. We've got some ideas about what we want the care to look like. Commissioners seem to want that. It aligned with what their objectives were. But the problem was the way we were set up. So I had a bit of revolution. We got some people on the board who weren't from a healthcare background, were from sort of small to medium-sized businesses, so they understood what the growth and maturity that we needed to have. They knew what that looked like. And then I took advice. I stepped down as managing director. They didn't say, I think you should step down as managing director, but it was clear really that we needed somebody who was a good operator to develop the infrastructure. And that's not my skill set. My skill set's more around leadership and culture and all of that, and I'm from a physio background, a culture, so that's very much about dealing with people. So why wouldn't it be something that I could carry into business? So that was probably the best thing that I ever did. I kind of stood back. My job's to pick the team, and to look at strategy and culture and be an ambassador for the business. It's not to try and tell good people who will get in how they should do their job. So and people tell me that's probably the best thing I've ever done is stand back and let people get on with it. But I do pick the senior team. In terms of, so I became non-exec chair until about 4 years ago, part of our development and growth. Because as a small business or a business of any size, you've got to keep growing because you've got to keep paying for your overhead. And if you want to do more and better stuff, then you need more of an overhead. So I onboarded an investor in 2020. There's another story that was right at the beginning of COVID. So they want to appoint their own chair. I still want to have influence over the things where I think I add value. So I have this title, Group Executive Director, which gives me sort of license to roam internally and externally. So that's the story. And I'm 62 next month. So and I'm still very enthusiastic and very driven to see what value the business can add to the NHS. We're exclusively NHS. We got out of private practice more than a decade ago, and we're fully committed to state-funded healthcare.
Fascinating, Andrew, because that age 26 to go out of the comfort zone of somewhere where you had a pension, you had regular income, to actually then set up something with no kind of definite that you were going to get income in, but actually the three of you were relying on your own approaches. That's quite a leap, isn't it?
Yeah, but the way I guess it reflects my personality to some degree. I'm an optimist, glass half full kind of. Yeah, we can do it. Come on, let's find a way. And on the other hand, I was naive. I think that was a good thing. So I believed in, and I still do believe that we can add some value. We've got a role to play. Other people gave me confidence as well. It was, I shared some ideas with some other people. Very quickly, other physio colleagues who I knew from around Tyneside said, this is a great idea. Lots didn't. And that's still true today. And when we get on to culture and leadership, I think it's about being clear who you are, projecting that. And, if it's attractive to some people, that's great. And if it's not, then don't join us. But there's enough people believed in what I was trying to do. And when you get when people join you, and particularly if you're sort of outside of the family, there's a bit of a passion to prove people wrong. That actually, look, let's get together and demonstrate that we can do something that's different and really adds value. So yeah, people say that, but there are all sorts of times that I went through when I've got young kids where the bank are on the phone because we can't pay salaries at the end of the month because this PCG or PCT hadn't paid on time, and then you put your house, put a second charge against your house to be able to guarantee that. So there's all sorts of stories like that, but it was just tremendously and remains tremendously exciting rather than risky. I don't think I'm a risk taker.
So tell us more about your leadership style and how you set that culture in your type of organization? Because you've touched on this a bit, and you've gone through, as you said, quite a few different roles. But one thing you kept on saying was, I wanted to make a difference because I wanted to, I want you to almost put your stamp on how things operated, both at the beginning and right now. So what does that look like? Because series one in these podcasts, we've heard a lot from NHS chief executives about how they do that. What do you do to set the right leadership and culture in Connect?
I think I have an advantage in that I think there are pros and cons about working in the independent sector and the as a provider to the NHS and not being and statutory providers. I think one advantage that I have, which is specific to me and not to the organisation, is I'm the founder. I started it. I've spent 35, coming on 36 years in January. So people kind of go, you must really believe in this stuff. You've persisted at it for so long. And I think the thing about leadership is around, it's about showing that commitment. Why am I still here? Well, as a founder, and I still own part of the business, is I'm quite difficult to shake off, then, aren't I? So there is something about that continuity, and culture is a difficult, a bit of an intangible thing. It's a bit about values and a bit about some other stuff, and I can trace all of that back to my upbringing. I won't get into all of that psycho stuff, but I can trace it back to family. The values that I have, like most people, reflect the values that the families have and that the schools have, because that's the foundations you built on, I think. And then I've carried that into the business, and that's a bit of that naivety I mentioned in your 20s. I'm full of energy and I want to do something and express all of this, and that's partly what, as I said, what started in the business, and I've still got that. My nice colleagues would say I'm a disruptor. My wife would say I'm really difficult to live with, and I'm awkward. So there's something about carrying that through, and that's the people that we attract. That's why they come. That's why some of them stay. That's why some people go, because it's actually not quite what they thought it was. So our values: pioneering. We like to do things differently, not for the sake of it, because we think generally there are better ways to do things. And as we grow and we diversify, if we're interested in doing something, but find that we can't add any value, we can't disrupt it, change it, improve it, then it's not for us, because that's at our heart. Dynamic. Again, apologies for these, but we're an energetic bunch of people, and we celebrate that and reward dynamism in people. Quality, like lots of other people have, whatever that means, and then people. It is at the heart. We're a people business, just like most other providers are, but particularly as a community provider, there's not much capex, is there? It's your people that make the difference.
Let me just dig in there a bit then. So,
yeah.
Those are all great, and clearly they make sense. And as you say, you've developed them over time. But how do your team, how do your staff, because you cover a big geography, you cover UK wide now almost, don't you? How does that manifest to them, where they understand and can feel that culture, that you therefore are distinctive from the next Andrew Walton, who then says, actually, I want to go and work for them? So how does that, what's the tangible element of that culture and those values coming to life?
Just to explain the rate which we've grown, because it does affect the culture. It's harder. You have to commit more resource to be able to for people to feel that and experience that. So 12 years ago we were about 100 people, and we're now about 850, 900 people. So that's a lot of growth in a short space of time. And actually, if you took us to the beginning of COVID, we haven't had much growth. So we had 5 or 6 years of really rapid growth. So I think the question was, how do people experience that? How is it tangible to them? Well, we're a small niche organisation, aren't we? So in the world of MSK, you're very likely to know of us. If you're in the world of physio, you're very likely to know of us. If you're in the world of other clinical professionals, you might know us, but most people don't. So your audience for projecting yourself to is pretty small. So you've got a fighting chance of putting out there who you are. There are lots of misconceptions and myths about us, largely because we're from outside of the family in the independent sector. Although I have to say that's changing, we feel more welcome. But anyway, so we have, through the usual employer brand stuff. So we do things that. So we have we run something called Flipping Pain, which is about bringing contemporary pain science into the medical and the minds of the public. So chronic pain, as we all understand, is very troublesome. We discovered the foremost pain scientist in the world works in the University of South Australia. We approached him and said, "What are you doing? Because we need to do something in Britain." He was very generous with his time, and we have a partnership with the University of South Australia and have launched this public health campaign. So it definitely costs us money, but it's kind of the right thing to do. We're making a statement. We're not getting hold of something else that is well understood. We're getting something that's not very well understood. So some people go, "Oh, well, bless you, aren't you great?" And other people go, "No, that's something I really want to support. I like the fact that the organisation do that." So that's just an example of something that's tangible. I think that if you, as we do survey the staff on a regular basis, I take surveys with a pinch of salt, to be honest. I like to, as many leaders do, walk the floor, talk to people. It's much. There's one of you, Matthew. I don't know how many thousands of people your organisation employs. Mine's only 900, so I'm much closer to them. Yesterday, I signed 78 birthday cards for the month of September. Personally, wrote their first name, best wishes from Andrew. So I'm much closer. I make an effort to be close to people. I'm very visible, as are the rest of the SLT. I do a welcome to connect, which is, so I'll do one about every maybe 3 or 4 weeks. So for those joiners who joined in the previous 3 or 4 weeks, we'll have a face-to-face for an hour. Well, or remote or face-to-face if I can, but generally remote. But it's them and it's me. It's a relatively small group, maybe 10 people. So I deliberately use a style that makes me approachable and understandable, because I'm and I tell them the story. I'm from the West End of Newcastle, which isn't paved with gold. Bring humour in anyway. So there are lots of opportunities for touch points. There's lots of opportunities to celebrate individual successes. Always say hello to people. I can't remember their name most of the time, but but it's about humour and being human, I think.
There's some great continuity there with other NHS leaders that I speak to about personal connection, about making yourself available, as you've just said. You're not remote, you're out and about, you're visible, you want to know about people. I was trying to kind of sit there thinking, well, what's the difference then with NHS provided care and an independent organisation? And actually, you could be describing a good NHS leader in there.
I could,
couldn't you?
Yep. I think an advantage is it's a smaller organisation,
Yeah.
and an advantage is I'm the founder, so you can trace me all the way back, and there's some authenticity in that, because as an organisation, I mean, as well, is that people identify with that. So the employer brand, if you like, has probably just sailed through, hopefully.
Yeah, but interestingly, someone I know, Bijou, who's current chief exec up at Northumbria. When we spoke, she talked about the same things of continuity. She's been at that trust a very long time. She lives and breathes that area. Her family are there. Yep. She's got her roots are there. Her family use the hospital and its community services, and people trust her for that continuity. You're just saying the same thing, but with an added dynamic that you're the founder and the owner as well.
Yeah. For those listening, you could switch off now. I don't think I've got anything original, perhaps, to say.
Clearly a good salesman for Connect, but not for podcasts. Don't switch off, folks. More to come. So come on, tell me, what's the difference? I'm intrigued about what the difference is, though, being the owner and a private organisation, even though you're delivering NHS core services through contracts. What is the difference, Andrew?
From a leadership point of view?
Yeah, and also a culture. I think you alluded to this slightly. People's perceptions perhaps are wary of you, not you personally, but the organisation. Is that true?
It is, yes. Some people want to come and work for us because we're all about the money.
Yeah.
Well, they clearly haven't had a conversation with anybody, who's worked for us before, because that's not something that we talk about.
Yeah.
We believe if we do the right thing in the right way, we focus on a small number of priorities, and no surprise, what are they then? Patients, colleagues, and delivering value for money for the taxpayer. Those are the three things, the themes that we talk about. And right from the welcome to Connect, I say, if you're going to go back and do something and it's not going to contribute to one of those three stakeholders, then just let me know, because we could save some money in terms of your salary. So we're focused on a very few things, and money isn't part of it. We've got to make a margin on things that we do in order to be sustainable. Just exactly like you have.
Mm.
The differences are, and this can we find challenging sometimes, is we could get into a small argument about this, Matthew, but there are additional initiatives that we don't benefit from. So, for example, some of the uplifts that they're finding their way through into the NHS, it's very unlikely that they will come feed through our contracts, because we're not tariff-based contracts, and we're on a most of our contracts are block.
Yeah.
So we have to drive efficiencies every year in order to give this reward the staff. But we make I'm not pretending that we don't make a margin, but we have to do that on top, particularly with an investor. But those margins are small.
Yeah. And that point, is it because you're presumably employing people under Agenda for Change or comparable, and even if it's comparable, you still need to give people uplifts and pensions, etc., and you're just not getting that passport through?
Yes, and because colleagues we're dealing with the same challenges, whether you're a static provider or an independent sector. But we're coming back to that same point. I think that you've got so much money coming in, you've got a few priorities, and you're trying to do the best with it. And we are no different. We're no different to that, really.
And it's interesting when you just describe now about what your priorities are: patients, tax, good return for the taxpayer, i.e., being an efficient organisation and great outcomes. Does that mean you're distinctly different to other independent healthcare providers? Because you've clearly chosen that route for, you've said, take my values right back to childhood. I think we can all take our values back to childhood, to be honest. That's not anything new for people. But you've chosen not to provide private MSK work. You now provide public service, but from a private structure.
It goes back to my frustration in the late 1980s, doesn't it? I would still be working in the NHS, but it's just the organisations that I worked in at that time, I found really difficult to drive the sort of change, get the sort of enthusiasm. And it wasn't down to necessarily one individual. It's just being part of a larger organisation, particularly when, those were hospitals. So their priorities are not delivering community MSK, pain, rheumatology and mental health services. That weren't the priorities. Therefore, when they're investing, for example, in a system, in an IT system, they won't be thinking about the physio department, will they? And therefore, you're often don't have the tools to do, or there is a compromise in terms of what you have in order to be able to do your job. What I was able to do, particularly over the last 10 years, is I mean, that's why I'm still here, is, after, a 30-year career of trying to do what I wanted to do, we've been able to invest in the people and the systems in the small niche of the clinical services that we deliver. That's another difference. We've got 4 or 5 different clinical service lines. I don't know how many you've got, 50, 60, whatever it is. But so our infrastructure, we've invested in our infrastructure that's very focused on doing some stuff that is specific to what we get to deliver. And that's very exciting. It's very specific to what we do. And therefore, I think it works, and we've got lots of data to prove it. We've got the largest clinical data set for people with MSK problems in Europe, because we've put a data warehouse in 8, 10, 12 years, I can't really remember. And we've just been, putting people, onto our system ever since.
Yeah. So clearly, passion, you're talking niche, you're focused on a few things. Would you be a leader anywhere else, personally, do you think?
Part of taking my hands off the business is to allow, we've got a good team now, and I'm adding less value. It's much narrower, so I've got more time. And just like you kindly invited me to because you thought I could say something useful. Other people in other organisations asked me to do that, charities, and in equivalent providing services to the NHS. Because what most people say is how have you managed to do that providing to the NHS? So there are physios, quite a lot of entrepreneurial physios who do stuff in private practice. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to contribute towards this huge important thing, which is the NHS. So I'm still working as much, but I'm not spending quite as much time at home in Connect. I'm able to reach out and help other people.
And here's the question then, Andrew. If you had been in an organisation when you were that young whippersnapper of 24, 25, not that you're not a whippersnapper now, of course, but a young whippersnapper who really took your passion of area seriously and would have developed it, etc. Do you think you might not have founded Connect if you'd been given the ingredients in that fold?
Oh, for sure. It was only driven out of frustration that I couldn't express myself professionally. And then once you're on that, so into private practice where you can, but that's a bit, that's not where it's at really. That's just, you've got a single interaction being a clinician, haven't you? I always wanted to do something that was bigger than that. And if we had this conversation 15 years ago, it would be a different conversation. It's that last 10 years where we've really had the opportunity to do stuff at scale. And that's made me more confident in myself and given me more ambition for what I think the business can do. Because if you look at us as, we happen to be delivering MSK pain rheumatology because that was my clinical interest. But the investments that we've made in infrastructure and the experience that we've had because we've had the opportunity to TUPE staff across, we've had the opportunity to take on services in 40, 50 different areas over that time scale. We've had the opportunity to change clinical behaviour, shifting a sort of right to left shift, if you're sure you understand what I mean by that. More around the education, engaging, empowering people, more around secondary prevention, all of that stuff. We've had lots of opportunity to do that. So we've made loads of mistakes. We've invested in stuff to try and plug some of those holes and get it to run well. And now the exciting thing for me is that we can bring, in partnership with other NHS providers or commissioners, we can bring that skill set to bear on other clinical service lines that needs that right to left shift, bringing our infrastructure, methodology of change with clinicians, because that's the magic fairy dust that we need, isn't it? I think to get clinicians to do things differently when we can't afford to pay them off because they're going to work somewhere else. So we have to do it in a way that they embrace.
Yeah. So as I'm listening to you, Andrew, I think one big difference between what you've done and continue to do, and therefore potentially operating in a leadership way in the same way in an NHS fold, is some of the external stimuli. So you talked about investors coming in. You talked about purposefully getting a new board.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me the undertone there was those were quite rigorous conversations that forced you as the sole owner, as the founder, you had to operate differently. You were either you realized or you were forced to get in an operational leadership team that complemented your skills and allowed you to do anything else. I think I'm hearing that right. So
Yeah.
that wouldn't happen in the same way in the NHS, to do that aspect. That's quite unique to the private sector. That's quite unique to ownership models. So tell me, what was that like then? Because I bet there was a moment where you said, "Oh, well, actually, do you want to buy me out and I'll just disappear, or am I going to continue on?" And what was that like to go through those? Because letting go of something you've formed that you're clearly hugely passionate about, I bet that wasn't that easy.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. I'll try and be brief. So I had a light bulb conversation with. So part of my own development as a leader, I used to go into businesses around the northeast, talk to the other chief execs out of healthcare, and we've got a big Nissan plant, car plant, manufacturing plant in Sunderland. And there's a lot of smaller businesses that are part of the supply chain. The chief executive of Nissan wouldn't speak to me, of course, but the chief executive of a plant that made heat exchangers or car radiators to you and I went to have a chat with him. And I said, how's it going? And he was kind enough to see me. Never met him before. He said, he said, it's great relief, actually. You've come at a good time. I'm very cheerful. I've just renegotiated my contract for the next 5 years. I said, oh, great. How much did you get uplift? And he said, uplift? Every time I go back, they knock a few % off. And I'm committed to it for 5 years. Well, I was having conversations with, I think, PCGs or PCTs in those days. And I'd get a few scraps of a percent and think, well, it's better than nothing, I suppose. So it was like a sudden realization that you can't surely pay additional salaries and on less money. And anyway, so he put me right on that. So that was a light bulb moment that made me think differently. And so I've then been open to challenges from outside of healthcare to, well, how do you possibly do that? How do you do more for less year after year after year after year, while still having fun and still believing that you're delivering good quality? So that was a light bulb moment. And then the ownership piece is, this sounds rather grand and overblown. Like a lot of leaders, I'm a bit mad, and I know what I want to do, and I've known what I wanted to do since I was in my mid-20s in terms of delivering the type of care for. So the ownership is absolutely key to that, because even if I've got an investor, they still can't do things. Well, if the business is failing, they can do things, but as long as the business is successful, I've got certain leverage over them. But it's really good because they come in and challenge us. They come and say, why have you got 7 of them and 3 of them? Why haven't you got 5 of them and 2 of the other? Or why have you got any at all? Well, because we've always had them. Well, I've sought out whether it be non-exec directors from outside of healthcare or investors, because I get to choose my investor as well as an owner, by the way. So I had a beauty parade of 25 different potential investors. So you choose people who are aligned and who you think you can get on with. But I can choose. I could choose as an owner.
And then what was it like in that, therefore, negotiation of both for your investors and your non-executive to say, come on, Andrew, you need to be pivoting to do a different role. We have a different team around you. Use your skills in a different way. Was that just a natural progression as an owner and as a leader, or how did that happen?
I didn't get any hints. I know I've always known what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, and I've tried to surround me with people who can fill in my enormous gaps. I'm not a good operator, despite operating the business for the first 25 years. But as I've explained, since other people have come in, the business has grown rapidly. There were also opportunities in the market at a similar time. But if I kept hold of the reins, the business wouldn't be successful.
And that must be just a constant juggle of being able to do that. But you also said earlier that you wanted to make sure that it was still done with the right frame, with the right cultural wrap, with the right ethos.
There are some things I'm very particular about. and you've just punched those buttons here. And then there are other things where I'm not going to add any value, and I'm not really going to look at the detail of what you're doing either. In a business at less than 100 people, the governance, our governance was pretty light. A business of our size, CQC, we got good and outstanding and well led. So we have to have that governance in place, and I rely on it.
So people listening to this, hopefully they haven't switched off since you told them to, but people listening to this, and they're thinking, oh, I like the sound of that. What's your kind of 60-year-old Andrew telling a future Walton-like person coming through that? What would you say about leadership in this healthcare space, but from an independent sector point of view? What would you suggest they do?
As you said before, I'm not sure anything is peculiar to being NHS or independent sector. It would be, and it's all the cliches, it's be yourself, be human, have a bit of fun, be determined, and resilient. You've got to be resilient. You've got to be able to go into the corner, have a little cry, and then turn around with full of joy. Because my style, it's not everybody's style, is to try and add energy wherever I go. Share my energy with people and leave them feeling a bit more, oh yes, we can do this after all. So I don't think you're going to get anything original from me. It's, what I'm describing is just me, but lots of other people are like that, and other people are very successful with different styles.
Yeah, but what you're very much describing though is an important level of authenticity, and don't even if it's in the independent sector world where you suddenly have, you have margin, you have pressure, you have risk, you have revenue to worry about at that point, second charge on your house in your early years. Those are pressure. But you appeared to me, Andrew, that you've kept that solid approach of you've got to do it right, otherwise there's no point doing it.
Yes. And you've got to believe in it, don't you? Because sometimes you've got a difficult conversation saying to people, no, that just isn't the way we do it around here. And I think that's something, again, I think courage would be a quality that's important. Sometimes just you don't want to because they're nice people or whatever. And you've got to do it in the right kind of way. And, over 35 years, of course, you've had changes of management. And quite often, at senior level anyway, it's because I've had a conversation with somebody. Somebody's got to the limit of their capability, and they're unhappy and stressed because of that, and they're not doing a very good job, and it's not good for the organisation. So you've got to have those conversations in a human way. And I don't think there'll be many people I would walk past on the street who wouldn't, say, hi, how are you doing?
Really fascinating, Andrew. Fascinating. And as we wrap this up, what are you looking forward to next then, as an independent sector leader? What will we see Mr. Walton doing? Apart, you said you're diversifying, you're working with other charities and other things, but what are you looking forward to next?
I think in a post-COVID world where the pressures that they are, I think Connect Health has a role to play, and it feels like not quite going back to the beginning, but we've got to earn our corn. We've got to go out there and convince people that we've got something to add in the system that's wider than just MSK, pain and rheumatology. So that's my number one excitement. There are other businesses, with 20-odd-year-old Andrew Walton from the 1980s, who I think have got loads of talent, loads of energy, and actually I can pass it on. Lots of people gave me advice. Lots of people came and worked in the business and were really committed and supported me and filled the gaps that I have. I can go and do that. I can go and do that for other people. There's great pleasure in working, particularly with younger people who've got all that energy. And all you need to do is just sprinkle on, leave them with a little bit of a couple of thoughts. I've got enough energy left to still do that as well.
Well, Andrew, you've been very generous in your time. It's been great to hear how, the young Mr. Walton at 26, we won't go back to what that makes you in age again, working as a physio, setting up with GP and a podiatrist through to now having, 800-900 staff, but running an independent sector organisation that delivers NHS outcomes, good outcomes for people, good value and does it in a way that actually, I'd say, is culturally great. It's one that allows its staff to flourish, and that someone who has therefore pivoted and changed through that time, no doubt with some prods, but sometimes, because it's the right thing to do to develop your organization, Connect Health, into what it does now in its very great niche way. Andrew, thank you for those insights. We're going to spend some time at the end of this series kind of just unpicking what's the difference between NHS statutory providers and independent sector providers when we've had some more conversations. And I shall look forward to bringing some of the Walton views into that consideration at the end as well. Andrew, thanks for your time. You've been great.
Okay, thanks for your kind words. Thank you.